My name's Chris McKenna, and I play Raven Guard. I started collecting Raven Guard at the beginning of 8th edition. I had originally been collecting Space Marines when I was a young lad, but I realized I was an adult with a disposable income and I could actually afford to get back into the hobby. So Primaris came along and they just had this really cool look. They were tall, they were powerful, they had new helmets and new weapon designs and things. And so I came across the Rift Stalkers. And the Rift Stalkers were a new Primaris only Raven Guard subchapter. So the original army that I painted was white, and I added some yellow just for a bit of flavor, which as a new painter was probably kind of a terrible idea. But later on the Raven Guard Codex came out, and I had the opportunity to get the new Shrike model and the new Raven Guard Codex, and it just kind of really felt that if I was gonna do Raven Guard with Shrike, the chapter master in it, I should probably paint them up to actually be Raven Guard. As for what drew me to them, I always play snipers in video games. I really like the idea of sort of controlling positions, and so Raven Guard being a movement sniper army really kind of drew me to that ability with the army, and it turns out they actually had way more tricks up their sleeve than I originally expected. So they've been a really interesting army for a semi-competitive play. They were really strong in 8th edition. 9th edition less so. I'm still sort of building my list to try and make the most out of 9th edition, but they've been a really fun army to sort of bring against anything that's thrown at me, simply because they've got a toolbox of a whole bunch of different abilities to sort of be able to make the table mine with the army instead of letting my opponent sort of go wherever they want. Definitely like their pre-game movements. Raven Guard really benefit from a couple of Warlord traits and a couple of base stratagems that allow them to get up the field further, earlier, to really sort of put the pressure on your opponent. I find the best way to play them is to sort of put a hammer to an anvil, and I guess the old phrase is, give me a hammer and an anvil and I'll reshape the world. And the Raven Guard are really good at having a first turn advantage. 9th edition, they're a little trickier to play. If you don't get first turn advantage, the smaller points value, meaning smaller model count, meaning your opponent can get a hit into you early and sort of weaken a front. But if you happen to get some good placement and some survivability, you can really sort of box your opponent in and really score positional points in a way that's much more difficult with an army that has to actually walk across the tabletop. We're also able to really put pressure on key characters. The Raven Guard's special tactic is that in the tactical doctrine, they get +1 to hit and wound characters. This includes everything, including your vehicles. So I tend to play fast units and flyers because I've definitely caught opponents out by simply flying a gunship behind their warlord and just peppering it full of bullets, which was not something that they were expecting or screening against, especially in 9th edition. So yeah, there's a lot of ways to sort of put pressure into the places that I want to. I've just got to try and make sure that the key things survive long enough to do so. What are some of my favorite models? All of them. But I'd probably say I really like chaplains. There's something about a badass with a skull face and a beat stick that just speaks to me on the whole Warhammer level. My favorite model is probably the chaplain on a bike, the Primaris chaplain on a bike. The new model, as soon as I saw the previews for it, I'm like, I need that. I really need that in my army. I don't know it'll be super effective. I don't care. It just looks super cool, and he's probably one of my favorite paint jobs. Shrike's pretty cool. He's an interesting model. Very tall, which can make him difficult to hide, but it also sort of means your opponent knows he's coming. I have a soft spot for my Librarians. They ended up with a purple-pink color scheme as sort of like a sort of summoning shadow magic. The Raven Guard's magic is called Umbramancy, which means shadow in Latin. It's just sort of this cool extra aspect to them that being able to paint them up in gradients of purple looked really nice. As far as a breakdown for my color scheme goes, I start with a base coat of Mechanicus Standard Grey spray from Citadel, and then I do a sort of camo pattern on them in a mixture of Administratum Grey, Escher Grey, Mechanicus Standard Grey, which has a slightly different tone to the spray, which works out really nicely, and maybe any other grey tones that I happen to have around. And the secret weapon to really make the base coat look the way it does is a sepia ink wash that I have. It's got a really strong pigment and works a little bit like putting a wash on, but it really stains the colors, but not in a way that pools. So doing 2 washes of those really brings down the dark tone and in a way muddies up the patches of the camo that are in there to really give them this really neat urban spec ops look. As far as the blue trim goes, that is done with a Vallejo Sky Blue. It's got a really high pigment, so for something thin like a shoulder trim or anything like that, it basically only needs 1 coat. As far as the red goes, that's using Mephiston Red, a little bit of Doomball Brown if I happen to be doing some gradients. My metals I'm actually using for a lot of my golds is also the Vallejo Gold and a Vallejo Tin, which is a really nice warm dark metal which suits the dark look that the Raven Guard have there. And again, the golds only really need 1 coat to have a really nice shiny look to them. So generally for a lot of the white aspects of the Raven Guard is start with a light grey, probably a Ministratum Grey, do a couple of coats of that, and then just edge highlight it with Skull White. Skull White's chalky, it's generally difficult to work with, but for small things it works really well. And you're basically, especially against the dark blacks of the Raven Guard, you don't notice that the white is not a pure bright white, and it works really well just sort of tying those extra highlights into the color scheme. As far as what's next for my army, ooh, it's a hard one. It's a hard one. I'm currently experimenting a lot with Ninth. I did get the Indominus box, which came with 3 Eradicators, and originally I was avoiding playing with them because they seemed really, really, really broken. And they still kind of are the most damaging unit in the entire game. But as far as tournament level goes, and as far as 9th edition goes, I think I actually might not mind bringing them in, because being able to meteor bomb them into the middle of the table and instantly be in range of destroying a vehicle is a really strong ability. So I think I'll paint up the Eradicators for my Raven Guard as well as the Assault Intercessors. Also, maybe some Reavers. I think I have to get them on principle. They're not very good yet in 9th edition, but I think just if I'm going to be playing the Raven Guard Spec Ops army, I think I will have to get some Reavers just so I have them and can fill out my Raven Guard card.